Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. Tonight's special guest that we have with us, which is always an honor to work with anyone from the Garden Hotline, but especially Laura Matter here. She has a plethora of experience and wonderful information to share with you tonight on the management of pests, weed, and diseases. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome.
All right, so we ready to go?
Ready to go.
Okay. Thanks for joining us tonight. I know it's a beautiful night to commit to being online. These days, we had to wait so long for summer, and it's finally here. That I understand, the desire to be outside in the garden. But what we're going to talk about is being outside in the garden and the things that you see out there, and the problems that you might encounter, and the good things that you might see are happening, and how to manage all that. So basically, the concept that we are looking at is called integrated pest management, and we'll talk about what that is, and how to manage a garden naturally. So the definition for integrated pest management, and we call this IPM for short. And you'll notice this term IPM, especially with a lot of different city governments who need a program that shows that they are managing their grounds sustainably. IPM is a sustainable approach to managing pests. To do that, we combine biological, cultural, and physical and chemical tools. And the point of this is to minimize the economic, health, and environmental risks when you use something in the garden to manage your pests. So we're looking at thinking about a strategy of how to manage pests, which starts in a different way than just pulling out a spray and spraying. I want to talk a little bit about the history of pesticides and IPM. So Plato tells us that necessity is the mother of invention, and we see that down the years as pesticides were invented or synthesized and came along. Early on, heavy metals and natural plant extracts were used as pesticides. This has been the case, since people started doing agriculture. In the 1930s, DDT was developed. It was partly to manage disease vectors in World War II, where there were mosquitoes, that were infecting folks with malaria and different diseases. And so organophosphates are one of the types of pesticides that came out of that incarnation of thought of how to manage pests. And then in the 1950s, IPM itself originated as a response partially to the fact that we were using these chemicals, and we should think about what kind of effect they had on the environment and on ourselves. In the 1960s, when we were involved in the Vietnam War, Agent Orange and other herbicide use increased. They were using those to, spray jungle areas to defoliate the jungle. So herbicides use became a little more prominent. In the 1960s, also, the DDT began to be recognized as a dangerous chemical that had a lot of repercussions to health. And then in the 1970s, as a response to a lot of this, the EPA was formed. And so the EPA's job was to evaluate chemicals and different products that are used in our environment, not just pesticides, but pesticides were part of the projects they worked on. DDT was banned for use in the United States in 1972, and IPM became a national policy. And that's where I say you see it in a lot of government agencies now as a guideline for how they manage landscapes. IPM Coordinating Committee was developed in 1979. And then there was a long period of status quo. Later, in the late 1990s, the Food Quality Protection Act was passed, where people started thinking about, wow, we spray a lot of chemicals on our food. And so diazinon and chlorpyrifos were removed from public market so that, people just spraying in their yards could not use these products anymore. Diazinon in particular is a insecticide that was used on lawns a lot to kill crane fly larvae, and was getting into our groundwater, and is very bad for fish and amphibious creatures. In 2006, the EPA recommended restrictions on thousands of uses of pesticides. And so they've made plans to review all pesticides, the chemicals in them and their uses within 15 years. And, you know, we need to check now. We need to go back and check back on what happened with all those reviews. The more current concern people have is genetic engineering. Agent Orange was used for defoliating opium in poppy fields, and IPM is widespread in both agriculture and landscapes. These things all are sort of happening in tandem. Genetic engineering has been used to make certain chemicals more efficient, but that just means that they make more use of them. Organic gardening, of course, is becoming very well recognized. So here's a few facts and figures about pesticides. One of the things I want to point out that even though we have had 170% increase in pesticide use just in 2 decades between 64 and 82, and that same time period, with US crop production, there was 37% reduction each year by negative pest effects. So that percentage has stayed stable over the course of agriculture, even with the use of pesticides. So we went up 170% in use, but we didn't make any difference. That 37% reduction each year happened regardless of what chemicals we were using. We use a lot of chemicals. A lot of them are used on lawns, but 93% of agricultural crops are treated, are row crops. 93% of our row crops, 62% of agricultural crops treated annually in the US. That's a lot of food being sprayed. And then for us, this is about us using them in our yards when there are other methods that we can use to manage things. So the picture that you're looking at is casseron damage, which is a well-known herbicide that's used as a granular sort of scatter formula that you just put into areas like where you have a lot of ground cover and there's grass growing in it to help manage that. So the problem with pesticides, well, there's the obvious environmental health, soil, water, and air. Pesticides when sprayed can drift. Stormwater runoff actually moves pesticides from where you sprayed them, and soil can be mobile in that. There could be persistence where the chemical doesn't break down for a very long time. Non-specific targeting, which means that you're spraying for a particular pest, but you are killing 25 other things, perhaps. Only 5% of the insects that we find in our garden are bad bugs. They're ones that are going to eat our plants. So that means 95% of the things that are there could be being targeted by sprays for spraying, and we don't really want them to be. Food chains, we have pests eating those chemicals that are dying, but other things are eating those in the meantime. That whatever that predator was now has ingested that poisoned insect. And so there could be food chain ramifications to that where things are being impacted by pesticides that aren't also targets. And then herbicides can affect soil structure. So they can change soil structure, make it less arable to grow things in. And then of course there's a human health issue, and this is transfer this to your pets as well. We're close to the ground, especially when we're talking about lawn chemicals. They can be chronic or acute, but cancer, immune and endocrine system changes, reproductive system changes. It can be damages to the nervous system, and this partially depends on what type of chemical you're talking about. In 1995, 28 of 29 cities tested in the Midwest had pesticides in them at higher levels than advised. Pesticide interactions once combined in the environment are unpredictable. So we don't know where studies are usually done on, say you're going to study glyphosate, you're going to look at that, but what about if you spray DDT, 2,4-D, and you're spraying some other kind of fungicide at the same time. What happens when those chemicals get together is less well known, and we don't always know what those combinations are. You can have bioconcentration where something just concentrates in your system. Some chemicals are more prone to deposit in your fat cells and will stay there. They don't leave your body. Biomagnification, they could be built upon. So if you're getting more and more and more exposure, manufacturing footprint also is a factor when we're thinking about if we're producing all these things, then we're also producing pollution, potentially pollution and carbon footprint issues with manufacturing. So here's just the types of pesticides that are out here, just for your own general knowledge. You can have selective or non-selective pesticides. Selective means that it is geared towards killing a grass, but not a broadleaf weed. So it could kill grass and not dandelion. Non-selective means it will kill anything. Glyphosate, which is in Roundup, is one of those non-selective chemicals. It could be systemic or topical. So some systemic chemicals can be sprayed on. Sometimes they're injected into plants or trees, and they are taken up by the system of the plant, the vascular system of the plant. And then anything feeding on it will be affected by it, or it can kill the fungal organisms that are attacking something. Topical means that it's, it's like you're putting suntan lotion on or cream on your skin. It's put on the leaf surface itself. Pre-emergent means that you are preventing a weed from growing. So this is what Casseron does. This is what a lot of the lawn chemicals do that are in weed and foods. They are pre-emergents. Some of them are post-emergent, which kills the weed that exists. And then it puts this chemical in the ground that stops the weed from germinating, the seed from germinating. Now, by nature, a pre-emergent chemical needs to have long-lasting capacity. And so these are the ones we worry the most about because they may be in the ground for 4 months and still be potent. Otherwise, they're not effective. They could be in liquid form, powder or granules. They can be concentrated or pre-mixed. And then there are synthetic or organic types of pesticides. So, or even an organic pesticide, which is made from, it could be made from some type of fungal property that can kill a certain organism. It could be made from oils, from herbs like rosemary, and could be made from soap. Those things still can be caustic. They can affect you, not in the same way that like an organophosphate would, but it could still hurt you. They could hurt your eyes. They can burn your skin. And they can definitely hurt beneficial insects because they're not immune to the effects of oils and soaps in their environment. I want to talk a little bit about what organic means versus certified organic. You'll see a lot of products that say organic on the label. That just means that it's made from, contains a carbon-based substance, which is organic. Certified organic is a certification that is applied to a product that's met a set of standards. The standards are developed by the USDA, and they are meant to be used in organic production. So they are standards that set safety measures for how safe is this chemical to use in the environment and for you to use and for you to eat once it's been sprayed on the plant. You can see the difference by finding any of these labels on a product will let you know it's been certified. In particular, the OMRI label on the right, bottom right, OMRI means Organic Materials Review Institute. And this is a nonprofit that certifies products, studies them, certifies them, tests them, and lists them. And then the state approves that. And the USDA is the ultimate guide on all of this. But in Washington State, we have the Washington State Department of Agriculture can certify things as organic. Typically, you'll find the other two labels on food products, less so on like a garden product, like soil or sprays or fertilizers. So you're looking for that OMRI label if you're looking for a certified organic product for gardening. So then we have something called the safety data sheet that's required by law for chemical products, any chemical product. These are primarily intended for workers and emergency personnel. Emergency personnel, in case there's a fire in a unit that's storing chemicals, they need to know what's in there and what the hazards are. Workers, because they are applying them and being exposed to them. But for you, if you are spraying things in your yard, you need to know also what these things are. And they tell you the name of the substance, so what the product is made of, the physical hazards, like whether they target your organs or what they target on a pest, physical hazards if it can be also affecting your skin, health hazards, whether they're acute, chronic, or both. So acute would be you get a poisoning from an incident where you spill a bunch of chemical on yourself. Chronic, where you're around it over time and it builds up in your system. The routes of body entry, like whether you need to worry about it getting in your eyes, on your skin, whether you ingest it, and how to protect yourself. So the point of all this is to give you ideas of how you protect yourself from exposure to them. The permissible exposure limits, carcinogenic factors, and then environmental hazards and safe handling procedures matter because environmental hazards, could be that you spill this and you need to know how to clean it up so it doesn't get into the groundwater, that kind of thing. But also, how do these things, where do you store them? For instance, you would not store herbicides with pesticides and fungicides, or insecticides and fungicides. They don't store together on purpose. And do you put them somewhere where they're going to be in cool areas? Does the heat matter? Will they combust? You need to know all those things. So all of that is available to you if you want it when you are purchasing chemicals. Always follow the label instructions. Buy and mix only what you need. A lot of people, we have people call the hotline and go, is it better if I use more? And it's not better if you use more. You're wasting your money and you're wasting the chemical and you're exposing yourself to more chemical than you need to. It's not going to kill something more better than the amount that's already been prescribed to use. Don't put them into the garbage. Don't pour them down the drain. We have the hazardous waste management program in King County just for this. So they are there to take your extra chemicals. If you're not going to use them, take them to them so they can dispose of them safely. Don't reuse empty pesticide containers. You need to triple rinse them, put holes in them, and throw them away. And then keep pesticides, of course, safely locked away, cool, dry, well ventilated. Keep away from flames. Metal storage containers can corrode. Be aware of that. So over time, those chemicals in there can corrode the container. And, if you have moisture in the unit where you're storing them, that will add to the problem. And then keep them away from other garden supplies like your fertilizers. You don't want them near them. So there's a lot of information out there on pesticides. You will have access to the recording. Is that correct? Afterwards, Elizabeth?
Yes, it is accessible right now on our Facebook Federal Way page and will be soon uploaded to our YouTube channel.
Great. So you can refer back to this to get these links, or you can take a picture of it. That's what I do usually. And these are great resources for you to find more information. And then there's the Haz Waste program in King County that has good resources for how to dispose of things. So, but what we really want to talk about is how do you do integrated pest management and how do you avoid using all those chemicals so that you don't have to worry about them. You don't want to have to store them. A lot of times you don't use very much of it and then you have the stuff sitting around. So here's the main 3 steps for IPM: prevention, observation, and intervention. And we're going to go through each of these. What we're looking at is some methods to prevent and also to treat that are safe, like washing aphids off a plant, putting mulch down as a prevention method to keep weeds from coming up. The copper slug barrier can keep slugs from a part of your garden because they won't cross it. It's metal, actually, they have moisture in their body. They get an electric shock moving across that. And you can use this fabric cover, row cover to keep certain insects off your plants that are flying insects and lay eggs on them. I've been picking off of the cabbage plant this week, little green worms that are the imported cabbage worm from this little white butterfly that floats around the garden. So prevention is the first step, creating a healthy garden. This is really the work of gardening. This is what we do all the time. This is when we garden, we're doing all these things, and these are the reasons we're doing it. Prevention really means make your garden healthy. Do all the things that a plant needs. Put it in the right place in the first place so that it's not struggling for light or get too much light. Water it properly. Water it in the morning deeply. Avoid overhead watering to reduce the incidence of fungal diseases. Remove diseased plants from the garden. Get it out of there if you have something that's really bad so that it doesn't spread. Put compost in your soil. Make your soil really healthy, and put wood chips down or leaves around your plants. Mulching not only helps conserve water and keep weeds down, but it actually moderates soil temperature and keeps your plants healthier because they aren't getting stressed from too hot soil temperatures. In the wintertime, it can do the opposite, where it can keep the mulch or the soil warmer as well. Keep a diverse garden. More diversity you have, the more diverse good insects and good predators for bad bugs, and birds and different critters that will actually help keep your garden free of pests. If you're growing gardens, a vegetable garden, you want to rotate crop plants around because certain crop plants will have specific issues with especially diseases, but also some insects. And when you grow something in the same place over and over again, you're essentially creating habitat for that disease or pest organism to live in. So you want to fool it, you want to break the life cycle, you want to move things around. And then don't crowd things too much. More crowding also leads to lack of air circulation and, again, more fungal issues in a garden. The second step is to observe, be a detective. This is the fun part. This is where you get to learn. You get to look at your plants and know, learn about what are the potential problems that this plant might have. So for instance, if I'm going to plant beans in my garden, vegetable garden, then I know that there's a black aphid that loves green beans. But I also know that nasturtiums are attracted to that same black bean aphid, and you can use that as a trap crop, for instance, to plant near your beans. Now, the sad thing is the nasturtium will get covered in aphids, but you can pull those and throw them away, and then your beans are going to be safe from the aphid because they will have preferred to go to the nasturtium. You want to learn what the signs of damage are. There are some things that look very similar. So learning, like, is this a slug, or is this a stink bug, or is this, the imported cabbage worm that's eating on my plant? They have different ways that they make their damage. They also, like a slug, will typically leave a slime trail, and you may be able to tell by that. You want to know their life stages and understand the life cycles, because as I said, if you interrupt the life cycle, you're going to reduce the incidence of that disease or pest. And if you have, for instance, aphids in your garden, they are born pregnant, and so they are popping out babies as they are being born. They're like ready to pop out little baby aphids. So they can increase exponentially in the garden, and they will be there all season long. And so you need to really be paying attention, because it's not just once they're there and then they're gone, and once you get over it, you're over it. You have to be coping with them all summer long. So understanding their life stages, what point they're most vulnerable. This is what a pesticide does. We're picking pesticides to use that you spray on something that will kill it when it's most vulnerable. If you have scale on a plant, scale is a sucking pest that attaches itself to leaves and stems, but it's often they call it scale because it's armored. It usually has some kind of protective cover, exoskeleton. And when you spray it, you may not have any effect on it anyway. So you spray those when they are in what we call the crawler stage, when they don't have that protective cover. And so we are using that same strategy to think about, when do we interrupt the life cycle by other methods? Do we put the floating row cover on to prevent the insect who flies in to lay eggs? from ever being able to lay the egg. And then we've interrupted that cycle. She can't lay her eggs there. Those larvae that are so destructive cannot hatch out. So that's our goal. You want to make this a year-round habit because insects come and go at different times of year. They live over, some of them in the garden, diseases do in particular. And you want to keep records about when you see things so that you can know what to expect next year. The hoarded cabbage worm butterfly usually comes in around April and is gone maybe November. They're here for a long time. They can have multiple generations. So what are we looking at here? We've got a pest we see here, and we're seeing 3 different life stages of that pest. Now, I bet most of you recognize this bottom picture. And that is the tent caterpillar that we see that explodes in population in the Northwest. Every about 7 years or so, we see this huge infestation of them. They make tents up in our, especially fruit trees. They love our ornamental flowering, cherries and things like that. And this is when we see them, and this is when we're bothered by them because they're chewing the life out of the leaves on our trees. Now, the good news is trees usually refoliate after this kind of attack. So they don't typically kill a tree, but they can make it look pretty bad for the summer. But what we don't typically think about are the other life stages. So there's the adult moth that these come from. This moth you don't see very often. It flies around, it's obscure. You're not going to target it because it's hard to find. But what you can target is that egg mass that's on that branch that people sometimes don't ever see and don't look for. So look for those things in the wintertime after they've been laid on the trees. They're going to sit there until the spring when they hatch out into these tent caterpillars. And if you can prevent it by peeling that off, you're never going to get that tent caterpillar in the first place. You don't need to spray it. You don't need to do anything like that. You just peel it off the tree. So lots of ways to manage pests, but you need to know their life cycles and their life stages. So here's an interesting picture that was sent to the garden hotline many years ago. This person was sort of confused about what was happening to their lawn. It looked like there was some kind of fungal attack. Some people have said they think it looks like a lightning strike. So the clue with this was the weather that preceded this observation was we got a really deep snow. And what happened here was that they had voles in their lawn, and the voles came up higher into the ground because the ground was so saturated from all the snow that they broke the surface of the soil in the lawn. And when the snow melted, this is what they saw. This is a vole tunnel pattern and that you would normally see under the ground. You wouldn't see it because it would be under the ground. So now we're seeing what that looks like because it broke the surface of the soil. Then there's also look-alike damage. So I want to stress that not everything is a disease or a pest. There's a lot of environmental factors that can happen with plants. So here's air pollution damage. Here's drought damage. And both of these are things that affect the chlorophyll cells in the plant, which dies and becomes yellow. And but you can see there's different patterns of destruction here. The air pollution is sort of diffused through the leaf, and then the edges of the leaf are affected first with drought, and that's very typical. And then you have winter injuries. So this whole hedge was frozen. What didn't die were all the little laurel seedlings that are trying to grow. It's a boxwood hedge, but the laurel is there. And now you can see that there's an interloper, and you can just pull all of this out and start over. But the laurel hedge was not affected by the snow, and the boxwood was. And then this is salt damage also from snow, where people were scattering salt on the sidewalk to melt the snow, and it actually can damage your plants. A lot of people make cocktails with salt in them to kill weeds, but be careful because it will also kill soil life and also your other plants. Now we're looking at real disease organisms. So on the top left, we're seeing virus in camellia. And what's interesting about this is that some viral effects in camellia actually were selected for to become varieties of camellia that have variegation. And so viruses are interesting and odd. It doesn't hurt, this particular virus doesn't hurt the plant. It changes the chlorophyll in the plant, and it can cause it to have patterns that horticulturists find pleasing. And then they take cuttings of it and they propagate it and they make a new plant out of it. So some diseases don't do any damage at all. You have things that are bacterial, like what we're seeing on the top right, and you can see the bacteria building up in the stem of the plant, and then fungal issues like you see down below. In the middle, what we're looking at is botrytis. Is very common on pansies. I saw a bit of it this spring with all the wet weather we were having, especially just as it started to warm up a little bit, and it sort of a gray mold that grows on tips, new shoots, and new flowers of plants, especially see this on peonies. On the left, we're seeing Phytophthora, which is a really devastating root disease that will kill roots, and then rims will die as the roots that feed them are killed. And this is bad in the nursery industry and also in the Christmas tree industry. And then on the far right, we have verticillium wilt, which happens in maples. And this is a disease that sort of gets into the vascular system and clogs, all its waste product clogs up the vascular system of the plant so that water can't move through the plant, and the plant starts to die back. So these are actual, disease organisms that you want to be, aware of. You want to know which things can affect what. The plant pathology lab at UW and Puyallup can help identify things like this. So here's some specific diseases that affect things in the Northwest that we're very aware of. Clubroot is a soil-borne fungus. It affects things like broccoli, cabbage, kale, cauliflower. It can affect things like mustards and turnips and those too. It's less likely to impact them over time because it takes time to grow into the plant, and it creates these weird little nodules that you see, this root swellings that are abnormal. And again, like verticillium, it clogs it up, and it can't take up water, and it can't take up nutrient. You'll see a lot of wilting in the midday sun, even though the soil's wet, and especially in these thicker leafed plants, which take longer to develop, where the disease takes its time developing. So with something like a radish, it's less likely to be affected because it grows so quickly. You can get by if you have a clubroot in your soil with growing things like mustard greens and radish, because they are only like about 30 days. And so you have less probability. However, if you're going to grow radish and mustard all summer long in the same spot, your later crops would definitely be affected because you're giving it its host for all that period of time to develop in. This is something that can be controlled somewhat by addition of lime in your soil, which raises the pH or the alkalinity of the soil. Crop rotation is the most important thing to do, is move them around, break that cycle. Once you have it in the soil, 7 or more years until you can grow these crops again successfully. The Canadian canola industry is doing tons of research on this because canola is a brassica. There's one that happens to tomatoes. It's the scourge of the Northwest. We love to grow our tomatoes here. We are not prime tomato growing country because our season is shorter. This year in particular, we had a terrible spring to get our tomatoes out early enough to get a good production. The late blight can affect tomatoes in this area as our weather starts to get a little more moist later in the summer. So we get through this dry period of July and August, and then in late August, it starts to get a little more moist. You get rain that hits the ground and splashes soil up onto the leaves, which can infect them. You get these kind of oily, sunken spots, lesions on the stem, and as fruit develops on the fruit, and it can destroy your whole fruit crop very quickly. I might add, this could develop in days, very fast. This particular disease organism can flies through the air and can infect other plants and can go about a quarter mile. So, community gardens are really susceptible to this. You can prevent it by putting mulch down to prevent soil from splashing, only water at the base of the plant. Or you can use cloches so you can avoid it rain even on your plants and just control the water completely. WSU did a great study on this where they put tomatoes in high tunnels, and then they planted the exact same configuration of crops outside the high tunnel in the ground with no cover. And all of the things that were outside got late white, and all of the plants in the high tunnel did not. And that was the only difference, was that one had protective cover. It was watered at the base. There was no splashing of soil. There was no wetting of leaves. The other thing that happened in the high tunnel, though, was there was a higher incidence of other kinds of insects that like that warm weather. So you trade one for the other, but it depends on what the bigger issue is. Kind of like when you're taking medicine, you know, it's like you take it, even though it might give you side effects. Powdery mildew is another very common thing we see. Powdery mildew is a generic term for many, many different types of fungi. They are different genera and species. They can be host specific and usually are. So what gets on a rose is not the same powdery mildew that gets on your pumpkin plant, for instance, or your zucchini. They are spread by airborne spores. It does increase with high humidity and dry weather. We saw a little bit of this earlier on this year when it was warmer and wetter. And then it's been kind of on pause for a second, but I think it'll be a little worse this year than normal just because it got started earlier. Water on the leaf does impair the ability of the fungus to reproduce. So this is one of those diseases that actually benefits from being sprayed with water, whereas most of them you want to avoid wetting leaves because it actually encourages the growth of the fungus. This discourages it. It's most important to clean up, take away the worst leaves. If you can prevent it from happening, there are some baking soda sprays that can work, but it's more prophylactic. You have to do it ahead of time. Once you get that white mold on the plant surface, leaf surface, you're gonna not be able to remove that other than removing the leaf, but you can prevent it from spreading and growing more. Roses are very susceptible, pumpkins, columbine, even Oregon grape gets it on the new growth. So I want to talk a little bit about cherry trees because they're susceptible to very many different diseases in the Northwest. And one of the reasons is because they're bloom time. They bloom when our weather is wet and cool. It makes spraying problematic, even if you're using natural sprays. And if you're not, most of these take repetitive spraying programs. You spray when they're tight in the bud, you spray as they're starting to open, and then you spray when they're fully open. And you can't do that always because it's raining. And so you miss your windows, you don't get all your sprays in. So what we're looking at in that top picture is brown rot, which is really susceptible. Cherry trees are really susceptible to. And it enters through the flowers and then spreads through the tree and can actually cause limbs to die and cankers to develop down the road and secondary disease issues. What we want them to look like is that bottom picture. So, you know, trying to get later blooming cherries, just knowing that some of them are going to be susceptible, picking varieties that might be more disease resistant that people have developed over time is helpful. I put a stilbe in here because it's a beautiful plant that people sometimes have trouble growing here. It's not even a matter of disease issues, it's a matter of culture issues. It needs well-drained soil, and we have, you know, we may have really sandy soils in some places and it's not nutritious enough for it. So adding compost to that can help. But a lot of times people have really clay soils, which when they dry up, are really hydrophobic, and it's really hard to get water back into them. And so organic amendments, again, adding compost will help. I tend to grow mine in pots. I live in West Seattle, North Delridge area, and my stilbe don't like it in the ground here very much. So I just keep them in pots where I can control the watering and control the soil. They don't tolerate drying out. Once they dry out, you can get a lot of dye back on them. So this is a matter of cultural care that a lot of times people think there's something wrong with them, but it's really, they're so sensitive to changes in moisture that we get damage on them. All right, so here's two insects. And we want to know which one is the pest. So the one on the left is a ground beetle, and the one on the right is a root weevil, and it's on a rhododendron leaf, so it's rhododendron root weevil. This guy on the right chews the heck out of rhododendrons. If they have a very curved edge on the leaf, they have a hard time wrapping their little mandibles around it. They can't bite it. If it's too fuzzy, sometimes that will affect them as well. So if there's a lot of indementum or the fuzziness on the underside of the leaf, they don't like those as much. So there's tons of rhodies that are more or less susceptible to root weevil that you can find. And then the one on the left here is a ground beetle. This guy also looks, he looks like he means business like the root weevil on the right, but what he's after is slugs and slug eggs. And so this is your friend in the garden. It likes grassy areas. It likes mulchy areas, leaf cover, leaf litter, places it can hide. You often see these when you disturb the ground when you're weeding and unable scurrying out. You want them in the garden. You want to provide places for them to hide. In farms these days, people are creating what we call beetle banks, where they create rows. So say you have a bunch of row crops, you're growing a whole bunch of peas or beans, and or beets, and you've got one row that is just a big mound of native grasses. And this is where the beetles live, and they sneak down into the field and eat the slugs and then go back home at night. And so, or vice versa, they night feed too. So basically you're creating habitat for them to live in. So think about that as you create your garden, that you don't have it all too pristine. You don't have just this slick ground with no mulchy materials that are chunky where these guys can live. The root weevil, other methods of managing this pest are to make sure that the branches of the rhododendron don't touch the ground so that they can't climb up the branches. And then you can put a band around the trunk of the rhododendron shrub, which it's just a piece of cardboard maybe with some sticky Vaseline on it. You can buy products, Tangle Trap, Tangle Foot, that do the same thing, but you can also just use Vaseline, and they'll get stuck trying to move up and down the plant and can't do their damage. There are nematodes that can kill them when they are in the larval stage in the soil. You have to time that just right. The soil has to be warm enough. The nematodes need to be the right species, and the larva of the root weevil needs to be present. So you have to make sure all those three things are happening at the same time so that you can control them that way. So lots of other insects that we're dealing with. We've got apple maggot, which is this fly. It lays eggs on your apples, and then the larvae tunnel through, and they tunnel all through the apple. And this is the destruction that you see, and it basically ruins the apple. It makes it mushy. It doesn't keep well. It rots. We also have codling moth, which goes to the core of the apple. And this particular apple has had both types of damage in it. And the codling moth goes to the core and eats the core out, and it can also cause the apple to rot. But the flesh is much more pristine, and you can still eat the apple. These can be managed by covering the fruit after it's starting to develop, when it's at about a quarter size, size of a quarter. And you keep, these days people are netting whole trees. So growing dwarf trees and then netting them can be helpful. It's a lot of work. If you have a big old apple tree, picking a section that you are going to cover, or you're going to put, you can put nylon footies on this, or little wax paper bags, and at the point where they're developing at that quarter stage, and then that keeps those flying pests from being able to land here and lay their eggs. There's lots of information about these guys. City Fruit has tons of info with apple maggot and codling moth. There's lots of kinds of leaf miner. This is one that gets in birch. We see them in chard and spinach and beet greens as well. And the damaging thing here is that they ruin the leaf. Now in a birch, it's aesthetic damage more than anything. But when you're trying to grow chard to eat, that's the part you're going to eat, and they've destroyed it and killed it, and you can't eat that leaf. They get between, the larvae get between the layers of leaf, the epidermal layers. And so sprays don't help much anyway, because you can't get at them. So prevention is the ticket here. You can put that floating row cover on as soon as you plant them and leave it on all summer so that the fly cannot land here and lay their eggs. The eggs are on the back side of the leaf. Typically, they look like little tiny specks of rice and often deposited in groups or in little rows. Very, very visible, very obvious. And if you're looking for that, you can remove the eggs so that you never get the larva to develop. This is Iranian mite in a grape. It mostly does cosmetic damage. It can, over time, weaken the plant. You don't get as good a grape harvest, but it's a little mite that gets into the leaf and makes galls on your leaves. And then, of course, the ubiquitous aphid on the rose. Aphids typically love new growth. The more fertilizer you give things in the early summer, the more probability you're going to have aphids on your plant because you're pushing new growth. So chemical fertilizers actually can exacerbate having aphids. Using natural fertilizers, which break down slowly over time and slow feed a plant, are going to be a better way to go, and you're going to have less aphid damage. These are soft-bodied. They are pregnant, like I say, when they're born. So they propagate fast. And you can use water to spray these off. You can rub them off with your fingers. You can use soap and oil sprays, but be aware that soap and oil sprays can also kill beneficial insects, of which plenty are trying to eat these guys. So here's the apple maggot, the cardboard traps, pheromone traps, and then the nylon footies that I mentioned, and codling moth. Cardboard wraps are good for codling moth, which has 2 generations a year. Apple maggot has 1 generation a year. There's lots of other kinds of pests. We have slugs, which are not an insect, they're a mollusk, and lots of them in the world. And this is typical slug damage. You can see in this picture, you don't even see the slime trail. So they can get up there and do damage even though you're not aware that they're there. Putting in slug traps with yeast or beer nearby, a little cottage cheese container sunk in the ground, some baker's yeast and water. Leave it up about a 1/4 inch so black beetles don't fall in there. You don't want them to die. And then you'll see if you have slugs because you'll trap them. They will climb in of their own free will. They're after the yeast in the beer or the yeast that you put in there, and they will die. And you can dig a hole and bury them and then start over again. And it works really well where you have things like a dahlia that keeps trying to come up, and they keep eating the top of it. And eventually, once you put a slug trap in, that plant can grow. And once it's grown, it doesn't matter if you eat the bottom of it. This is deer damage on this red stem dogwood, coming along and clipping off the new growth. In some cases, native plants like this actually are good. Willow in particular is a good offering for deer if you have a property that has deer damage, deer roaming in it. Give them some plants to eat like this, and then they sometimes will stay away from your other plants. It's not always guaranteed. I have known people to hang up like Irish Spring soap in little plastic cups. The cups are upside down, the soap's inside of them, and then that smell deters them, and it seems to work for some people. And some people use predator urine, so there's actually a market for that. There's a website called predatorp.com. You can actually buy different kinds of urine that will dissuade animals from coming around if that's their predator. All right, let's look at some weeds. So Luther Burbank, who was a great horticulturist in California, his definition of a weed is any plant growing in the wrong place. So a weed could be an ornamental plant that you put in your garden, but all of a sudden it's taken off. A lot of people think forget-me-nots are weeds. I grow them on purpose because they feed early bumblebees, and I can manage them pretty well. They're an annual. They do seed themselves all over. But then in the spring, I pick and choose where I let them grow and pull out the ones I don't want and just let them bloom where they are. Weeds can be useful. They can be also vectors for other problems, and they can be indicator plants telling you things about your soil that you need to know. So the annual sow thistle on the left. This year, I had annual sow thistle in my front yard against the fence that looks, like if you're coming up the sidewalk, you can see my fence. This annual sow thistle was 8 feet tall because of all the rain that we had. So really benefited from the spring. It was huge. I have had to cut it down several times. It's in between the fence and some paving stones, so it's hard to get out. But annual sow thistle can be a vector for thrips. And so thrips are really devastating insect to get on other plants. And I actually do have thrips that have gotten on my honeysuckle, which is right next to where these sow thistles like to grow. So this is sort of like proof for me watching it happen in my own yard that I've seen it happen. So, you know, keep it in mind, this is a vector that can infect other plants. You want to maybe get rid of those weeds, but some other weeds like clover can be useful. They're bumblebee food. They're really good in the lawn. They actually add nitrogen to your lawn. A lot of people don't like the look of the lawn that it has other things in it. But lawn seed used to actually come with clover seed in the old days. It was intentional because it helps feed the lawn. It keeps it green. It stays low, easy to care for. And it is a useful plant. Dead nettle is an indicator that you have some disturbed soil and it's moist. And it's also, this is an edible plant. It doesn't taste like much, but it is edible. It's in the mint family. And it's actually kind of pretty when it's blooming. It gets the top leaves, get that sort of purplish coloration. And it's very easy to pull. So it's not a weed that we want to worry a ton about. But, you know, just know your weeds, know that some are worse than others. The things we're most concerned about are not noxious weeds, excuse me. And this is a large selection of different weeds that are considered noxious in the Northwest or problematic for different reasons. Bracken fern is, when you have a stand of bracken fern, that's one plant. Like all of those plants originate from the same rhizomes in the ground. It's one plant, even though it might cover an acre. Kind of like fungus, you know, that spread through the ground. These guys have quite a network. They're not great for pasture animals, which is why they're considered noxious. They're fine. Like I have them on the hillside in my backyard and I don't mind because it's just native plant up there. Purple loosestrife likes water, wetland areas, and it really will displace native vegetation. Scots broom that you see on the side of the highway here is very invasive. It does fix nitrogen in the soil. It's one of those colonizing plants that comes in after disturbance, but it's displaced. It's not native to the Northwest, and it will take over an area. It also has, a lot of people have allergy responses to this, including me. This one bothers me. So it gets pulled out. Very difficult to remove. Very, very thick stem, deep roots. You have to use sometimes weed wrenches to pull that. Himalayan blackberry, we all know. It's on the noxious weed list in King County, but they don't require it for removal because it's just too much everywhere. So the things they require for removal are usually things that there aren't a ton of or are extremely dangerous to, you know, human beings and wildlife. Blackberry is not extremely dangerous. It's actually feeds us. We love the berries, but it can be rat territory, and it can really take over native planted areas. The plant below is giant hogweed. This is a dangerous plant. This is in the carrot family, and it grows wild along roadways. It likes sort of moisture, seepy areas. You see it on stream banks and lakesides. It's really huge leaves, really huge flower. The problem with it is the sap in this plant. If it gets on your skin and the sun hits it, you can have a very phytotoxic effect. It can burn you very badly, very badly. But I will warn you that many plants in this family have that capacity. It's just that this is much stronger than most. So even Queen Anne's lace or your carrots in your garden can do this if you get that on your skin. Some people are sensitive to it, so just be aware of that. Knotweed, we have Japanese knotweed, Bohemian knotweed, giant knotweed varieties. This was brought in as an ornamental. It's edible if you eat it in the young stages, but it also displaces all native vegetation, takes over a stream bank. Beekeepers love it because it blooms really late in the season, so it's really good food for honeybees. Honeybees are not native here. And we don't have a lot of things that bloom late in the summer because our bees, our native bees, are going to bed, you know, at the end of summer. they're not typically around into the fall like honeybees are. And so this is a European or Asian, Eurasian plant that is beloved of, honeybees, which come from other parts of the world. And they go together, but they don't go together in the Northwest very well with our native bees, this plant, and our native plants. So we'll displace anything on the hillside. It loves riparian, again, wet areas along streams and riverbanks. And then we have tansy ragwort, which is invasive in big meadow settings, and it can actually poison livestock as well. And it's not a great plant to have in your garden. So noxious weeds. These are the noxious weed. King County Noxious Weed Board has tons more information online. So our step then, once we've done prevention and once we've learned what it is we're trying to prevent, we want to intervene if we need to. And sometimes that's just the case. You may have a plant that was your great grandmother's rose that you want to keep, and it's not great because it's susceptible to black spot. So how do you do that? What is your tolerance level? How do you manage it? These are decisions you have to make. Sometimes as you're growing things, you have to review your plant choice and placement. Like, did I put this in the wrong place to begin with? You might need to move it. You might need to evaluate cultural conditions. You might have an area that, like flooding all the time, and you don't know why. Even in the summer, the ground stays wet. What's going on? Is there an underground spring? If so, then you adapt and put plants there that can handle that. And when you intervene, then what is your method? Are you going to use hands-on treatment like they're doing here with squishing the aphids? I don't do that because that grosses me out, but I will use water to spray them off. Aphids are not winged unless there's too big a population on a plant. They will develop wings and fly to another plant. And they're not, and in the fall, they develop wings and then disperse to overwinter. And so when you knock them off the plant, there are these little soft-bodied things that don't climb back up on the plant. They usually get picked off by birds and other creatures. So knocking them off can help. These are mechanical methods. You can use biological methods, which can include creating a diverse garden that has beneficial insects that will come in and eat your aphids. It can also include biological sprays like Bacillus thuringiensis, which actually is a bacteria that can affect caterpillars. But you want to realize that if you are spraying to get rid of the particular caterpillar, it's not selective just to that caterpillar. It will kill your swallowtail caterpillars or whoever else, other butterflies that you might want in the garden. And then chemical, I include even the certified organic products in this, the oils and the oils and soaps, because a chemical is a chemical. It can cause damage. It's intended to cause damage on whatever the disease organism or insect is, but it can cause damage to your plant or to other unintended targets. So just be aware of what you're using. We start with the least invasive method and move from there into the chemical range. And then with the chemical, we start with our certified organic products. So here's some questions about what do you do here? Here's an azalea with powdery mildew. Maybe this has the most lusciously scented, beautiful, this is deciduous, and it has these beautiful orange flowers which smell like heaven. But every year it looks like this. Are you going to tolerate that, or are you going to try and find an alternative for that? And these are personal decisions that people can make. That powdery mildew isn't necessarily affecting anything around it because powdery mildews are selective. They are host selective. The rose and black spot, maybe this can be managed. Maybe you need to open that up. It's kind of dense. Maybe that's the problem here, is that it's not being managed properly. Or you can buy a variety that is resistant to black spot and not worry about it. Skimmia and spider mites, very typically seen. This evergreen shrub is often planted in the wrong place. It's put out where it gets too much sun, it gets stressed, and it gets spider mites. If you put it in a nice shady spot and it gets well irrigated and it's mulched well, you often don't even have this problem. So you can move the plant or start over and put skimmia in a different part of your garden. Put something out here like, the Mexican orange or something that Deutzia or Weigelia, things that like that sunshine. And here's an example of some cultural issues that can happen that aren't, these are not the iron deficiency that you're seeing in this tree. That's something you can correct. So it's just that it's not getting the nutrients that it needs. The water standing here, maybe that's not the best place for a street tree. What's happening here is all that mulch is building up against the base of the tree, and it's going to rot this tree. Not only will the water and the roots rot the tree, but the wet soil and mulch up against the bark will rot it. So you got to change that condition, or you got to adapt and put something in here that can tolerate it. Here's examples of hand mechanisms, washing aphids off, using these weed pullers. These are great tools. Water your lawn, get that prong right over the crown of the plant. You press down on it with your foot and push it into the soil. And then you pull back on the handle and it pulls the plant out. And usually you get a good piece of the taproot out. So I do this in my own lawn. It's very small on purpose, but I can manage my weeds by using this method of weed pulling. Even with buttercup, it works. Then we have our biological helpers. And what you want is to create a garden that will attract things like this. One of the resources that I gave Elizabeth to share with you is a sheet about beneficial insects and which kinds of flowers, which plants are attractive to which insect. So you can look to see what does a lady beetle like, or what does the parasitoid wasp want in the garden, and you can cater to them. Some of them are crossover, so a lady beetle and a parasitoid wasp might like the same thing, and then you can have a bunch of that. But more flowers, the better. More flowering things in more seasons are better. And having them at different heights, having them in shady areas and sunny areas, and not just a flower garden over in one corner of the garden, but interspersed throughout all your plantings, so that there are flowers to attract these guys in close to wherever the pest issue is. The lady beetle larva that you see here on the right, the big picture, is got an aphid in its claws, its little paws there, and it's sucking the juices out of it. Aphids suck plant juices, which are sugar, and then the lady beetles come along and eat them. The larvae in particular are voracious. They look like little tiny alligators running around your plants. One thing about lady beetle or aphids is that they're farmed by ants who are also trying to harvest all the sugar water, and they will move them around plants and increase populations. They farm them essentially. So if you see a bunch of ants on your plants, often, especially trees and shrubs, often they are after aphids. Some ants will eat things like broccoli seedlings, so there are ants who actually will knock your broccoli stands down as well. So there's a mealybug destroyer, there's the green lacewings. These guys are so voracious that she lays her eggs on tall, thin strands that stand up above the leaf, and the egg hatches singly and drops down and scurries off to find food. She doesn't lay them in clusters next to each other because they will eat each other as soon as they come out of their egg. So they're laid apart singly to protect each other. Voracious little things. Lady beetles, there's the larva, there's an adult. They can eat 50 aphids a day, some types as many as 200 to 300, but they eat other things too. So they're great. They're active most of the growing season if there's enough food around. And then if you are going to buy them, release them in the evening only with water source available to them and near where there's a food source, or they're going to just fly away. When ladybugs wake up in the spring, they go to the mountains, like the foothills. They cluster together in a big log, a hollow log, and a big ball. And then when they warm up, they fly back to the lowlands. So they're dispersed. They disperse. They're programmed to disperse. You don't want to just put them in your garden, have them fly down the block, unless everybody's releasing ladybugs, in which case you'll get your neighbor's ladybugs. So it's better to not release, but to attract the native ones by putting in the right plants in the first place. Here's the green lacewing. They eat lots of things. They can eat caterpillars too. They're just, I mean, that caterpillar that guy's the larva's eating on the bottom is bigger than he is, but they're still on it. They're beautiful. This is one of my favorites. So there's a wonderful little video that National Geographic has on YouTube you should look at. There's two of them. One is parasitoid wasps on a caterpillar, but you want to look for the ones on aphids. They actually have, instead of a stinger, they have an ovipositor. They poke a hole in the aphid body and they lay an egg. And that egg hatches out into, into progressive sizes of the wasp inside the body. And when you see them fully emerge, the aphid looks bloated and tan like this and has a little hatch in it. So they basically make this little submarine hatch and the adult flies out, and they have eaten the inside of the aphid and killed it for you. You will see that if you see this activity, do not spray because they're active and they're in the aphids, and probably most of the aphids are affected. And so they will find their own demise through that method, and you won't need to do a thing. I've had this happen on artichoke plant before, where it was covered in black aphids, and then the next week I came back, but I saw this activity and I left it alone. I came back and it had about 2/3 as many aphids. So they're only a third of the population was still there. The rest of them were dead. So it happens real quick when it happens, but you got to give them time to do their work. They're very tiny. You start seeing them in April. You can see them flying around in the crux of like broccoli plants that you have out in the garden. They're looking for aphids. They know where to find them. And they are just super efficient. They can parasitize all kinds of things. And they think that even the adults are predaceous. I don't know as much about that. I'm totally fascinated by this method that they do. They are super attracted to things in the carrot family. So if you just even scatter cilantro seeds in your garden. I don't like cilantro. I grow it anyway because it has these tiny little umbrella shaped flowers these guys are super attracted to. I usually let some carrots overwinter so that I can get the flower out of them the next year so that they will come to my garden. So anything that family, dill, fennel, carrot, celery. I have some celery plants I've had for 3 years that I've never harvested from. I just keep letting them bloom. And that's the reason I let them bloom. They're beautiful flowers, but they also attract these guys like crazy. Lovage, angelica, sweet Cicely, lots and lots of things in this family. So here's the nematodes I mentioned earlier for root weevil. You can use these for crane fly larvae in the lawn. They're even, I think, seeing, what was it I just saw yesterday? Oh, I've forgotten again. Nematodes for another insect that they're trying them out on. But they actually invade the larva in the ground, but you have to have the right species of nematode for that larva. The soil needs to be warm enough, at least 55, usually 60, and they need to be present at the time that the soil is that temperature. But they can be super effective. They just do this work under the soil and you don't even know what's happening. So we really want you to try to attract them. Hoverflies are another great predator of aphids, mealybugs, other small insects. Especially the larvae. They also look a little bit like those lady beetle. They look like little alligators. And this is a fly that looks like a bee, but it hovers in place. You'll know the difference because it sits still in front of you. They're great pollinators. They're cute and they're small. Some of them are bigger, but a lot of little tiny ones. Super important pollinators. And then chickadees, they're young, only eat insects, and so they're fed insects. You'll see chickadees with like tons of insects in their mouth feeding their babies, and then the adults will eat the seeds of weeds, so you can like reduce your weed load. Bats, and then you may not have those weeds in your yard, but your neighbor might, and they're blowing in, so it's still helpful to have those adults visit your yard. Bats eat tons of mosquitoes, so you really want to have them present in your garden to help keep your mosquito population down. You can put up bat houses to attract them to have a home These three plant families super important. Native plants are also important because they attract native pollinators and beneficials. And there are native plants in all three of these families you can find. But also if you're, just gardening, you love growing flowers, these three families are super important. And the good news is we're growing all these all the time anyway. So these are typical plants that we see in our garden. In the mint family, we're including all these Mediterranean herbs like rosemary and lavender and sage and thyme and oregano and marjoram and mint. And all of them are fabulous insect attractors. When you stand in front of a lavender in the summer, it's just full of different flying creatures, all kinds of things. And then daisy family, we grow everything in the daisy family. Dahlias, sunflowers, cosmos, zinnias, marigolds, calendula, the list goes on and on and on. There's a million different things. We grow all of these anyway. And then the carrot family, as I mentioned, it's a beautiful little flower that they get. That's anise that we're looking at there. Here's the BT I talked about earlier, Bacillus thuringiensis. It can attack different family of insects. So Kristaki is for the moth and butterfly family. This is typically used like with gypsy moth and all those guys. This would work on a tent caterpillar, but again, you want to be careful. If you're going to use this, you have to target very carefully so you're not killing other untargeted organisms, other kinds of moth and butterfly larvae. There is one that attacks flies and mosquito family. Pests have to be feeding for it to work. And for some people, this can challenge your respiratory system. If you have asthma, you want to be careful not to use these products directly yourself. And they have to warn people who have respiratory issues when they're doing like overhead spraying, which they've done in the Northwest periodically. So chemical controls, remember that all chemicals, including oils and soaps, can have potential toxicity. Always use the least toxic thing first. Inert ingredients often are not described on the label because they're proprietary. And so the company is not going to tell you everything that's in there. They have to tell you what the active ingredient is, but they don't have to tell you what the carrier is. And sometimes those things can be just as caustic and just as dangerous as other things. So, always use caution with pesticides in general. Use chemical pesticides, non-organic methods as a last resort. Always follow the label. Acquire that safety data sheet. Wear protective clothing so that you don't get it on you, and dispose of those containers properly, just to be safe overall. So just to end with this interesting picture of a sapsucker on a tree. So this birch tree is being attacked by this bird, which we love to see in the garden because it's beautiful, but it's actually looking for sap in the tree. A lot of times birds are looking for insects, and so they are targeting a tree that's already been targeted by a beetle, maybe a bark beetle that's gotten into the tree. And a lot of birches are having issues with bark beetles in the Northwest. My neighbors actually just took one down off the parking strip because it was half dead. Well, it's 3/4 dead now. But this is attacking a live, healthy tree. There's no insects. It's after the sap, and it's actually causing damage to the tree. So sometimes some of our friends in the garden can cause damage, and then you have to protect a tree against bird damage like this. You can put up protective covers over the bark to keep them off of it. There's different things that you can do. Living with Wildlife is a great page through the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife that talks about problem animals in the garden and how to manage them. And then this is us. This is the hotline. That's our phone number. We have a website that has a form where you can send us questions, or you can email us directly at help@gardenhotline.org, or call us 633-0224-206. And we're there Monday through Saturday. We're a free service. We're managed by Tilth Alliance. And we are sponsored by the Hazardous Waste Management Program in King County and Seattle Public Utilities. And our goal is to help you grow a beautiful garden, naturally, the best you can. and then help guide you through choices you need to make. And that's what I got.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. We got any questions, folks? Feel free to enter in the chat box. And you're also welcome to unmute yourselves. Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you, Aubrey, for the claps.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Well, I had posted those links that you had sent to me, Laura, in the chat box and on the Facebook Live, so folks can have those accessible. And yeah, and then if anyone wants, Laura, would it be okay to share the PowerPoint if anyone's interested?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
You can just make it into a PDF and it's fine.
Okay, fabulous. So if anyone's interested in the PowerPoint itself that Laura presented tonight, feel free to email me at Marlene's class host at gmail.com. I'm going to enter that here in the class host in the chat box, but want to open it up for any gardening questions that we might have while we have the expert here.
Yeah, what do you guys got going on? Anybody have any interesting stories even? You want to tell us something fun that's going on in the garden? I love to hear what everybody else is doing.
I had no idea that ladybugs had had the earlier stage, and because of these classes, I saw one in my dad's garden, and he's like, "What is that? Is that bad?" I was like, "No, it's a butterfly, or no, a butterfly, a ladybug, and this is its first stage." And he's like, "Oh, neato."
Yeah. A lot of people worry about them because they look they look scary. They're little alligator things. They're running around in the plant. They move pretty fast when they're moving. And it's like, what the heck? And so we get those calls every year, really. People say, I have this thing, I'm worried. And we're like, no, just like you said, yay, it's perfect. It's good. Yeah, it's good to know that. I mean, you want to know not only the stages of your bad bugs, but all the life stages of your good bugs. So you know what you're looking at. What do their eggs look like? So you're not like peeling them off when you want them there.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to squish them, and when they can do some real good.
Right.
Any more questions, folks? We'd love to hear from you. I'm gonna check the live stream here. No questions there, but I see. Well, Laura, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure working with you and Garden Hotline, and it's just so amazing the community resource that y'all provide, and to be able to do these classes. We really appreciate you.
We appreciate the platform to be able to talk to people. We're essentially a phone and email site, but we do go out in the community and do workshops and then do talks like this. And it's great to be able to reach people who don't know we're there and know that they can call us anytime they need a question. The benefit of what we do is that we are we're giving you individualized advice. So it's not just like, here, read this. We're like, what's going on in your garden specifically? And we ask you very pointed questions like, what kind of soil do you have? Is that plant, where is that plant planted? So we can help guide you properly. So it's helpful. Yeah.
It really is. It's invaluable to to the community, and it's fabulous. And then y'all do a Q&A the third Wednesday of each month.
Yep, next Wednesday on the 20th is our next one.
Fabulous. Well, there you go, folks. If you have any other direct questions as well, from 6:30 to 7:30 next week on the 20th, you can get some more questions answered. And the garden hotline number, is it actually the 206 number, or isn't there a 1-800 number?
No, there is no 1-800. It's 206-633-0224.
I will add that as well to the info here on the live stream, so folks can ask questions. Let's see, we'll get that there. Garden hotline. Wonderful.
And Elizabeth, what's our next class? When are we up next again?
Oh, yes. Very great question. We have, I believe it's September. Yes, September for the fall lawns. And that is September 10th at 10 a.m. to 11. And then we also have the prepping for winter. That's going to be a really good class with Laura as well. October 15th from noon to 1:30, and that's a Saturday. Both of those next classes are on Saturdays.
Fabulous.
And then we also have the garden hotline holiday wreaths.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one's gonna be a really fun one too. And that is on November 5th from 10 to 11:30, and it's also a Saturday. So mark your calendars, folks.
Yeah, those will be good, all of those. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming out in on a nice sunny afternoon.
Yeah, hopefully you're able to catch some sunshine, y'all, and get in the gardens, after getting inspired by this class.
Go take a look now, see what's out there.
Yay!